Hirsch.
I'm Jim Carney, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education.
Today, New York City and schools across the nation grapple with the opportunity gap that exists between students from vastly different economic backgrounds. Recognizing that non-academic factors can affect student success, educators are turning to a different model: community schools. These schools are trying to make a real difference in the lives of students, parents, and their neighborhoods by partnering with service agencies to provide on-site resources for children and their families. Today, we will examine these community schools. Many open 6 days a week, all day and into the evenings, that strive to help students overcome some of the consequences of poverty that can interfere with learning.
Later on in the program, I'll see how community schools exactly work when I visit one. But first, Linda and her guests begin in the studio.
My guests today are Jane Quinn and Nicole. Jane Quinn is the director of the National Center for Community Schools at the Children's Aid Society. Nicole, a former New York City high school teacher, is an education policy research analyst at the Center for New York City Affairs, contributing to the latest research on New York City schools. She is also currently pursuing a PhD in public policy. Thank you both for joining us today on EdCast. As part of his campaign, Mayor de Blasio promised to expand by 100 the number of community schools in New York City. So what is a community school, and why are we happy that we're expanding them?
Well, a community school is a school, as you might expect, that really works in partnership with the community. And it does that in order to meet the needs of the students at the school primarily. So the school really has an open door that brings in needed supports and services and opportunities for the students and families at the school. So it's about partnerships. So a community school is a school, but it's also a set of partnerships that are focused on promoting student success.
Does it have anything to do with a charter school, or are these two completely separate entities?
They can be the same kind of school. So you can have a charter school that is a community school. A lot of the Children's Aid, or a couple of the Children's Aid Society schools, are charter schools, in fact. So they have not only very strong academics, but also strong services to support their students and families.
I've read in your literature that you talk about a developmental triangle that you think, or I guess the components that are important for kids to succeed. What is that developmental triangle?
Well, the developmental triangle is really a snapshot of what we're talking about. And in the developmental triangle, we put children in the center of the triangle, and we surround them with these three big sets of things that we know are important if we're going to get kids to productive adulthood. So on one leg of the triangle, we have the core instructional program. Mm-hmm. And then the second leg of the triangle is a whole set of expanded learning opportunities, things like after-school programs and summer camps. And then on the bottom of the triangle, we have a set of services that are designed to remove barriers to children's learning and healthy development. So the partners might be working to bring in medical, dental, mental health, and social services. But we don't conceptualize this as smokestacks. Right? Mm-hmm. We're trying to connect these three things. So we're connecting the core instructional program to the after-school and summer programs. We're connecting the health clinic to the work that the teachers are doing. So that's where the triangle comes into play. So it's a little bit of a snapshot of this idea.
Why is addressing non-academic factors so important?
Well, we've talked a lot about closing the achievement gap in the last 12 years of education policy, even more than that. Mm-hmm. But we don't talk about the opportunity gap that exists before the achievement gap. Students come in with barriers to learning, and they need to have extra assistance and extra supports to catch up, to be ready to learn when they come into the classroom every day.
Now, Mayor de Blasio obviously is a proponent, and he's an advocate here. Is this a new, is this support new to you? Is this more support than you've had under Mayor Bloomberg?
Well, this is actually an old idea. We keep forgetting what a great idea it is, but if you really look at the history of it, we know we're in the fourth generation of community schools in the U.S. So the first generation really started with John Dewey and Jane Addams. And then we had another round of community schools in the 30s as a response to the Great Depression, another round in the 60s, an era of great social reform. This fourth generation, I think, is interesting because it is much more linked to the work of the core instructional program. The work of the partners is really integrated with the work of the school, the core instructional program. So this generation is about 20 years old. We have in New York City a couple of big examples of community schools, the Beacon schools that were started under the Dinkins administration, and then the Children's Aid community schools. And both of those were started in the early 90s and still exist, so they have good staying power.
It does seem that Mayor de Blasio has been a bit more vocal about them, though it seems, than has been in the past.
To differentiate his administration from the Bloomberg administration, they're both very focused on raising academic achievement, but the de Blasio administration recognizes that you can't just focus on what happens inside the classroom. You have to focus on a lot of the other elements that go into student learning.
Now, obviously, community schools are a national phenomenon, but let's talk about the ones in New York City. How many do we have, and where are they? Sorry.
The ones in New York City, we have the Beacons, so there's about 80 of those. The Children's Aid Society has 22? Something like that?
Something like that.
Okay, and then there are a lot of other schools, hundreds of schools that have partnerships already. But to differentiate between those two, there are schools that have partnerships that are coming in from the outside and providing services, but they're not integrating into the leadership of the school. They're not really targeting their services to the kids that need them most. So a community school, a well-developed community school, has a way of organizing all of the programs and to really meet the needs that they have.
How do you select a school that's going to be a community school?
Well, I think that there are a lot of different indicators that could tell us whether a school is ready to use this strategy.
So what do you look for? I'm sure people are thinking, oh, I could be, we could be a community school. What do you look for?
So you have to have a principal who's willing to share leadership, to share some space in the building, maybe even share some of their budget that they have. You have to have a community that's ready to support that. So a CBO, a
Share
community
the budget
based.
with who exactly? Let me just go back to
So one of the main community partners is going to, in an ideal community school, is going to be in the building and organizing those resources, as I just talked about. So to have a person in the building is a crucial part of the strategy, who is often an employee of the community-based organization, the community partner. So the principal can share their budget to pay for that resource coordinator, as they call it, or community school director, as they call it elsewhere.
Okay, so and what else do you look for? I know in your report there are many criteria for what you think makes for effective collaboration. What are some of the things that you look for in a school?
Well, I think what Nicole was saying about number one is the principal who wants to work in this more inclusive and collaborative way. And without that, it really is very, very tough. So, but lots of principals want to do this. We know that recently, the New York City Department of Education put out a request for proposals to 700 of the 1,800 schools, and they got 400 responses. So principals want to do this, and many principals that we talk to say, when can you start? We get lots of calls from principals, but that really is the number one thing. You also want the faculty in the school to buy into this idea, and then you want to have an array of community partners, but you want one that is really the lead agency. And the coordinator's role is really important because the coordinator is really going to work those corners of the triangle. That is making sure that all of these additional supports and services and opportunities are really integrated, number one, with one another, and then integrated with the work of the school.
And I would add just a particular challenge to New York City schools is that a lot of the schools share their building with other schools. And to make this a community strategy that really does bring in people beyond just the students and their parents, but also other community members, you have to have a building readiness. You can't just have one principal in the building to do this work.
So you would want, in a building that's co-located with more than one school, you would provide this to all of the schools that are in that building?
I think that that would be
your
more
idea.
effective.
I would think,
don't think it's
sure.
necessarily happening yet, but that if we move in that direction, it would probably be better for all the kids in that building.
And Children's Aid Society
it
does
would.
have experience with
Yes.
that. And in our community schools, where some of the schools have been divided up, there is one Children's Aid program that serves all the children in the school.
So what kind of professional development has to go on in these schools? I mean, I'm guessing that something does have to happen. What do you look for? What do you want to see happening in a school before you say, we're going to designate you a community school?
Well, the resource coordinator is going to have to be a talented, resourceful individual that does need a lot of professional development. So what we need to build up more effective resource coordinators is a program at a university system like CUNY to help train resource coordinators to learn the skills that they'll need to draw down funding streams, to connect the students in the school to the resources that they have at their community school, to work with multiple stakeholders and do a needs assessment, and all of those things. It's a lot of work to do. So professional development that helps that is, I think, the first priority.
And then I think there's some other things. You know, I think that sometimes principals also need some professional development around what does it really mean to have what's described in the literature as an inclusive leadership style, but what does that really look like?
What does that really look like?
Well, I think that we've seen it, so we can
Okay, what's
describe
it
it
look
when,
like?
yeah. I think a principal with an inclusive leadership style really welcomes community partners. I think that principal really understands the needs of the students and families at the school and is willing to say, we can't do this by ourselves. We need partners, we need help, and we need help in a targeted way so that we're making sure we have the right partners doing the right work with the right students.
So there's a lot to coordinate.
There's a lot to coordinate. And then what we find in our work in community schools in New York City, but I think it's true nationally as well, is that many teachers and principals say that in their professional preparation, nobody ever talked about parental engagement, and nobody ever taught them a course on child and adolescent development. So we find that it's important to do some cross-training at the building level to make sure that the teachers, the principal, and the community partners are on the same page about what are the developmental needs of an 11-year-old, for example. You know, and we know a lot about that, but sometimes it isn't taught in school.
Jim Carney had the opportunity to visit a community school, PS5 in Washington Heights. So let's take a look and see.
Great.
If you've traveled by car up the east side of Manhattan, odds are you've passed PS5, the Ellen Lurie School. Its principal is Wanda Soto.
Okay, PS5 was built on the concept of being a community full-service school, which means that it was designed to have a partnership with Children's Aid Society. It was built 23 years ago, and the concept was to have this as a safe haven where we treat the whole child. Academic, medical, health, and dental, and emotional aspect of it.
Madeline Gonzalez is the community school director.
A community school director works collaboratively with the principal to ensure that there's a full-service community school. And that means that we provide after-school services, we have a clinic on site, early childhood, and parenting classes for our families. So while the principal is focused on the academics, we can focus on the social and emotional. Our programs start from 0 to 3. So we have an early Head Start program, we have a Head Start program, then we have after school, holiday, and summer camp programs, as well as a full service clinic, which means we have a nurse practitioner. We also have a dentist that's on site twice a week. We have a medical doctor that comes in and assists. In addition to that, we have parenting classes, everything from yoga to GED, ESL. We offer also computer classes. We offer art classes for our families, and you can see some of the artwork posted in the classroom that are done by the children as well as the adults.
We start from literally from in vitro. From conception, we have an early Head Start program that starts from the age, literally from 0 to about age 3. And this is one way that socialization skills are developed, parenting skills are developed, and it's one way that their communication, they see the school as a safe haven. And this safe haven enables the parents to see that if they have a problem, it's okay to come to the school and talk about it.
Because you feel like you are at home. You always in the morning gonna have the coffee, you're gonna have the people that bring some information from outside, and sometimes it's complaining. I had to call down for complain, but it's like I had to hear, I had to listen to them and just to share whatever is going on at home. I already went through that.
The family room is a place where families come together, whether it's our early childhood families or someone from the community, a grandma from the community. They can come in, they could take parent workshops as well as get resources. So they might need assistance with housing, they might need assistance with eye vision, they might need assistance with Medicaid or health care, they might need money because they don't have furniture in their house. And this is the place, the one-stop shop where you're gonna come and you're gonna get those services, and we're gonna get you them.
Well, I enjoy being here because I used to be a parent here. I have been here for maybe 20 years already. Right now, my children are in college. One is in MIT, and the other one is in New Paltz. And for me, it has been like a journey just to be around here, because I just continue what I already learned here. I just give it to the family that came to this room.
Gary Perez is the after-school program director who grew up in the program.
So what we do is we have after school starting from 2 o'clock. We start picking up the children. They have snack. That way they can get something in their stomachs. And then we do academic, homework, and something social, emotional, or recreational. I'm actually a child from this neighborhood. I grew up in the program, and a lot of my staff are my former students when I was a facilitator. So it's a big deal to me because I have a personal investment.
A fifth grader who has gone through the program from K through 5. What does that student, he or she, come away from PS5 with that they may not get at another school that's different and that's special?
They find this as their home. Many of them go to middle school and can't wait to come back to provide services of community service in the school. So we have a partnership with one of the middle schools. Many of our children go there, and they have a buddy system, and we have a buddy reading system on Fridays every day. So they develop the socialization skills for the little ones, and it's developing, sometimes they need that male contact, which they don't always have at home, and developing those skills on how to communicate, even teaching them how to read. And sometimes we always say, you know, you always come back home. And that's what they do. They always come back home.
So, what'd you think? Typical, atypical school, community school?
I think it's a typical community school.
It looks wonderful.
You saw the print-rich environment. You saw a lot of bilingual education going on there. You saw the community partners. You saw very active parent engagement. And you saw that
I saw happy people.
you saw happy people, a lot more adults around.
Yes.
And I think you also saw the longevity of, you know, the parent coordinator being able to talk about how her children came through early Head Start, and now they're in college. And you saw the program director, the young man, talking about he's from the neighborhood. So there is a sense of community in community schools, and that is one of the very intentional things that we're trying to build.
What are some of the outcomes that we're seeing here in terms of the effectiveness of these schools?
Well, I really liked the use of the video to show it, because I think that there are a lot of outcomes that are hard to pin down with numbers. I think we're looking at happier children and healthier children, and sometimes that is, it's hard to identify with quantitative analysis.
How about things like attendance and retention?
So we have seen some studies that have come out that say that attendance has gone up. There are studies that have shown that some test scores, especially math test scores, have gone up with after school and other supports. And there are several rigorous academic studies that have been done to show that there's a very high social return on investment. So for every dollar invested in programs like these, there are multiple dollars that come back to the community.
How are the schools evaluated? What methodology is used to evaluate them?
Well, of course, all the New York City public schools are subject to the same, not the charter schools, but the regular public schools are all subject to the quality review. And of course, we know that the report card kind of system is
Right.
going to change, but all of these schools are subject to that system of assessment. In addition, the Children's Aid Society has commissioned a number of evaluations of this school that you saw and other schools. And so we have independent assessments of what's gone on in these schools, and it's very, very positive.
The new report card and school evaluation system that Chancellor Farina just announced is going to incorporate an aspect of strong family community ties. So we will see that these community schools do get recognized for their achievements in that area.
Now, the Children's Aid Society and the New School, I believe, just recently put out a policy paper talking about scaling community schools. The scaling's the new word. How to extend them, expand them, implement them. What did you find out in the policy paper? What are some of the findings of that report?
Well, we interviewed people from New York City and from all around the country, and we looked at best practices in cities that have been able to scale, like you just said. So we found that the cities that have central leadership structures, so organizations like a children's cabinet or a steering committee, are very important to this work citywide. We also found that there has to be a combination of public and private funds to support this work, and that if there is a central coordination of those funds, that helps community schools really get off the ground, because it's very hard to find, to organize all the existing funding streams that are out there, because there are so many. And then we found that there are some organizations that are really intentionally building capacity for this strategy. So a really great example, I think, is Tulsa, Oklahoma, that their scale is a lot smaller than ours, but what they are doing is taking several years to teach schools and community partners what this work is really like. And they don't become a community school until after a couple of years of learning about it.
Where do community schools get their financing from?
Well, I'll speak first about how we do it at Children's Aid.
Okay.
You know, we started 22 years ago with private funding because we were able to do that and we wanted to demonstrate what was possible. But over the first 10 years, we had a strategy to move to at least 50-50 public and private. We're now bringing in 2/3 of the money we're bringing into the schools is public money. So we really are showing that there are existing public funding streams out there that can be redirected toward the community school. There are a number of funding
You
streams.
need to be adopted by a hedge fund. I'm going to say it right now.
I'd love
hedge
to.
funds,
I'm
and so many
adoptable.
charter schools have been adopted by hedge funds.
I know.
I think a community school would be a wonderful candidate.
I
Just
agree.
saying.
I agree. And you know what's interesting, and schools don't think about this, is that there are a number of funding streams that they cannot access on their own just by virtue of the laws and the way they're written. Medicaid is a great example of that. But schools can tap into Medicaid if they have a partnership with a provider who's licensed by the state of New York to tap into Medicaid. So Columbia Presbyterian or Montefiore Hospital or the Children's Aid Society. We're licensed providers. So we are opening up new avenues of funding for schools by implementing a community school strategy.
And I just want to say that the report has a link to a list of 60 different funding streams that community school providers can access. So if they're community school providers watching this right now, they can find the link on the Children's Aid Society site or the Center for New York City Affairs, and they can get started. There are connections to the applications and analysis of what those funds can be used for and how flexible they are and other criteria like that.
Where is New York City right now in the expansion process?
We're getting started.
Need more schools coming online, so to speak?
Yes, absolutely. The New York City Department of Education and City Hall made a really important decision in June to redirect the state attendance money that was coming to the New York City public schools around a community schools strategy. So we're in the process now of actually getting those first 45 schools to be community schools. There's really a great need and a great desire, I think, but we are getting started. But this is step one, I think, of this broader scaling up initiative.
We only have a minute or two left, so I do want to ask you, in terms of the current DOE structure, do you feel that it needs to be restructured or redesigned in some way to better implement these kinds of programs?
Well, we found in our report that there are a lot of different departments or offices at the Department of Education that are already involved in this work. And so what maybe is a better way of approaching it is to fold them under one umbrella so that there can be more coordination and communication, and then tie that very closely to a citywide organization outside of the Department of Education. So all the different departments that are affected by this work can be aligned, and they can talk about things like data sharing, funding streams, capacity capacity building. All of that work needs a lot of different hands on it.
I know you mentioned the Children's Cabinet in the report. I have some recollection that it would be helpful if the current Children's Cabinet were able to also take on this idea of community schools. What does the Children's Cabinet look at right now?
Right now, they are focused on child and family wellness and safety, I think, is the focus. And so it's pretty broad. And the community schools strategy could be folded into that. It's a part of that. But that's also something that could be pushed aside.
We're going to have to stop in 1 second, so I just want to ask you quickly, moving forward, what's your wish list, briefly? As we move forward, what do you want to see, briefly?
I think that communities and parents should be involved in this planning process more.
Okay. Jane, any last word?
I want to see every school a community school.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. Jane Quinn, Nicole Mader, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with our EdBytes. Welcome back to this edition of EdBytes.
Merit pay for high-performing teachers is frequently touted as one way of improving teaching. Yet no study has ever proved that this actually works, and new research confirms that it doesn't. Research undertaken at MIT and Carnegie Mellon indicates that pay tied to performance has a negative effect on work, which involves cognitive rather than physical skill. If the tasks are mechanical, performance-based pay works as expected. But once cognitive skills are required, the result is poorer performance. These findings have been repeated frequently since the initial study.
Most of us have spent time on committees that use up lots of time, but don't seem to accomplish much. Now research confirms the 2 pizza rule used by Amazon and Intuit. Don't have meetings of more people than can be fed by 2 pizzas. The larger the group, the less productive it will be. Research at Harvard by J. Richard Hackman concludes that 4 to 6 people is the best size for a working group, and that no team should have more than 10 members.
Politico Morning Edition reports that IBM's supercomputer Watson is poised to enter K-12 classrooms. Watson is described as a cognitive technology that almost thinks like a person. IBM views Watson as a potential advisor or a digital assistant to teachers, providing lesson plans, for example. By next fall, IBM plans to have demo classrooms using Watson, and by 2016, to have actual operational versions helping teachers in the classroom free of charge.
After the state required New York City to find charters free space in schools or pay their rent in private spaces, the city has been scrambling to accommodate them. Now the Wall Street Journal reports that the city is paying higher than market rents for the Success Academy charter schools. According to the Journal, the city is paying almost $18,000 in rent for every student in the Success Academy charter, located at the former Mother Cabrini High School in Washington Heights. While the cost per student will decline as more students enter the school, overall rents are expected to increase for the site's housing charters. Recently, the state approved 17 new charter schools, adding to the city's costs. All this comes at a time when the city is struggling with overcrowding in many of its schools.
Going back to Watson, I just wonder if classrooms will do away with final exams and have Final Jeopardy instead.
Students might find that interesting.
Well, in any event, that's it for this edition of EdCast.
Until next time, class dismissed.